So basically what experts analyzing the black box data of this crashed airliner say is that the aircraft was intentionally pitched down and then it went into that scary nosedive, screaming towards the ground and impacting that mountainside almost at the speed of sound. Those images are not going to be forgotten, but I want to also tell you how difficult it actually is to crash an aircraft of this kind in the manner in which it went down. First of all, the first big thing that we should share with our viewers are airliners and aircraft like this Boeing 737 are designed to counteract extreme control inputs from the cockpit. They're designed like that. The aircraft have terrain avoidance computers and flight computers that basically don't allow many aggressive maneuvers. These are flight control computers on these aircraft which are built and designed to offset any, sudden or abrupt pilot inputs. That's to keep the aircraft safe. And for a steep dive of the kind that this aircraft finally saw, the pilots would basically have to disengage the autopilot, so they have manual control of the aircraft to push it into a place where the aircraft would not normally go. And only pilots, remember, only pilots are qualified to override all the safety mechanisms that are built into these aircraft, from the flight control computers to terrain avoidance sensors to autopilot, all these things. Only a pilot knows how to override all these systems and make the plane potentially unsafe for that kind of scary nosedive. Now, I don't want to alarm anyone, but the preliminary findings from the black box data of this aircraft accident suggest that this was intentional. What has been captured in that video was apparently intentional, and that either the pilots or someone in the cockpit, it could have been someone else, but most likely the pilots could have managed to do such a thing, which is why for now, even though it's not confirmed because the final report is not out yet, it is being possibly classified as a suicide by the pilots involved. Joining me live to get a sober perspective on what is a very, very troubling story, we have with us Captain Debolina Das. She's a former aviator, former pilot. Also with me is Dr. Deepak Raheja, who's a well-known psychiatrist, because this is a story that goes beyond just aviation. This goes into mental illness, possible suicidal tendencies, the humanity of pilots. Let's remember, and I want to put out a caveat here very clearly to all our viewers, that pilots are some of the most proficient, personnel. They handle huge loads of data and responsibility, and pilots are extremely noble professionals. So not for a moment are we suggesting that pilots are not to be trusted, but the preliminary findings, Captain Debolina, you will certainly agree with me, are quite troubling. The black box data suggests that this was an intentional act, that the aircraft could not have come down in this manner unless it was deliberately put into this kind of nosedive. But as a pilot, can you explain to us and tell us that this is, this would be the case, that only pilots can override the, safety systems inside airliners like a Boeing 737 to actually put it into that kind of near perpendicular dive, madam?
Yes, I mean, the thing is that since we are moving into completely digitalizing or automation,
yes,
so there are a lot of ways in which the aircraft can be managed or electrically, hydraulically managed to not enter into a dive or not enter into a situation which can cause an accident. But the only factor, the human factor, which is in the cockpit, the two captains, the two pilots, are the people who can override all the systems which are there in the cockpit at any instance of the flight and take over manually, which is basically done for the positive outcome and not a negative outcome, as we see in this case this time. It can be done. The captain can override all the systems that are there in the cockpit.
Just out of curiosity, madam, and not morbid curiosity, because we want to understand that this is also a very technical thing, and we'll get to the psychiatric part a little later. But Captain Debolina, what all would a pilot need to do in a cockpit to actually, tell the plane, no, we don't want you to be safe, we want you to get into this terrible dive mode? You would have to disengage a number of different things, I assume.
So, you know, when we mostly fly on automation, that is the autopilot, and the autopilot now has a number of softwares, computers working through in different phases, which makes the aircraft fly in cruise, descent, whatever is done by the autopilot. The only requirement by a captain or a pilot is to disconnect the autopilot. So if we disconnect the autopilot, then the automation is disconnected. So whatever inputs, the digital inputs or the electrical inputs that the softwares which are running the aircraft system is giving us will be nullified if we are removing the automation or the autopilot
Yes.
mode of flying. Then we come into manual mode, where
Yeah.
the aircraft is completely flown by the two pilots, either of them.